You're listening to HR Leader, inspiring you to lead the workforce of tomorrow.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the HR Leader podcast. My name's Jerome Doraisamy. I'm coming to you today from Camaragal Land in Sydney, and I'm very pleased to be joined for this conversation in the studio by Emma Davison, who is the Chief Executive of Virtual Headquarters. Hello, Emma.
Hi, Jerome. Thank you for having me.
Today, we're going to be talking about her four-step approach to recruitment and why it's so critical more broadly for employers and HR professionals to be thinking outside the box when it comes to recruitment and hiring in the current climate. Emma, before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do with Virtual Headquarters.
Sure. So I started as a physiotherapist. I worked on the Central Coast, just north of Sydney, and then moved to London where I worked at a hospital there across all different teams, all different sectors of the hospital. So that really, I guess, set me up for commercial leadership way more than I could have anticipated. Then I moved back to Sydney in 2020, kind of got stuck in Sydney during COVID and pivoted towards business. I've always been interested in the business landscape and started doing some work in the company my dad founded 20 years ago, Virtual Headquarters. And we sell a virtual reception service, and that started when my dad founded the company, which essentially provided small to medium businesses with a credible professional telephone answering service when outsourcing that function was very ahead of its time. That then also pivoted the way for the virtual address side of the business, which I then kind of grew and took over when I came into the company in 2020. So we partner with over 60 business centres currently and growing to provide businesses of all sizes with a credible business address so they can register it with ASIC and use as their principal place of business. They can market it on their website or other marketing material like business cards, letterheads. They can have their mail managed, and importantly, it supports this whole idea of flexibility, which is a global trend and a very exciting space to be part of.
Yeah. And it's not a very common trajectory, I'm guessing, to go from being a physiotherapist to then being a CEO. Are there any transferable skills or lessons that you learned from being a physio that are now very useful for you as a CEO, have you found?
Absolutely. And I think it was very much underestimated when I first came into the business world. But ultimately, and I see this through our recruitment process now, is skills can be taught, but attitudes and values, they're so much harder to train. So all of those soft skills that were really important in the physio world and the healthcare world, talking to people, grace under pressure, effective communication, prioritization are all so incredibly important in my role now as a leader. And ultimately, the same as a hospital, if we've got a great team and have good processes in place and empower those people to follow those processes, that sets you up for success.
Yeah, and in the context of recruitment, it sounds as though those skills that you picked up as a physio, including and especially those soft skills and being client-facing or customer-facing, it would really help solidify your vision for what one needs to do when recruiting for new hires. Is that a fair presumption?
Absolutely, Jerome. And I think as a small business, particularly competing against much larger companies with much deeper pockets, one of our strategic advantages is to have the right people in the right seats and aligned culturally on where the business is going and the similar set of values. And that's very powerful, and that momentum compounds. And I think having a strong culture will compound a business's success. And likewise, a poor culture with a misaligned team will compound problems, and we deal with enough problems every day. We don't need more of them.
Yeah, no, certainly. So let's talk about the recruitment landscape, and we want to get into your four-step approach to hiring and why it's so valuable. But before we do, I'm keen to get your thoughts on the recruitment landscape as it currently stands. It strikes me as a middle manager that expectations and demands have really shifted in recent years, and certainly with more generations in the workforce than ever before, it can be very difficult for team leaders to strike the right balance, with their teams, with their workforces. But what's your take on the recruitment landscape right now and some of the challenges that are arising as a result?
It's a really good question. For us and me personally, going through this process currently, we're hiring at the moment, and there's so much noise out there. And with AI as well, available for people and employees to use to polish their resumes and come across, really refine their skill sets through a cover letter and resume, it can be very hard to ascertain the person behind the CV. And so that's become something that really influenced why I went through a kind of 4-step recruitment phase, because the AI landscape has really transformed how people can present on paper. So that's where the character and those kind of transferable soft skills really are important, with flexibility as well. Now people are expecting more of a hybrid work model. So you're seeing people apply for, 3 days at home, 2 days in the workplace, and companies have to adapt. We work with business centres around the country, and the ones that are really thriving are the ones that really focus on community and in like creating a workplace where people want to come to work. There's a phrase called, earn the commute, and they really place value on, wellness amenities and ensuring that it's a workplace where people can collaborate and feel that they want to come into the environment. So, it's a really changing landscape, and I think you've got to be open to all different aspects of the recruitment process and see how AI is influencing that as well. So that's kind of, what's led me to my process.
When you speak to other business leaders, other managers, where does recruitment sit in the triage of urgent priorities for them? There's obviously so much change happening in the market right now, new technologies, trying to stay afloat in times of economic and geopolitical turmoil. How much is recruitment keeping managers and leaders up at night relative to some of these other factors?
I think I can only speak for myself, and speaking to other leaders in the space, it's probably the biggest thing to keep someone up at night, because it's so incredibly important and is such a strategic and impactful decision, and one of the most important decisions a business can make. So, if you get that wrong, and as a small business, we can't afford to get that wrong, because not only is that a financial burden, but it also is lost momentum, opportunity cost. It impacts other members of the team. So making the wrong decision can really put you back a long way. And I think that's why it's so important and does keep you up at night, because, it's a tough process and a very competitive recruitment landscape out there.
Yeah. We're chatting with Emma Davison, and we'll be back with more right after this. Emma, do you think it's harder to recruit than perhaps it's ever been, or certainly at least harder than it has been in recent years?
I do, yes, absolutely. And I think that is driven by, one, it's so much more competitive out there, and also with AI, and I know I've mentioned that earlier, but it is really transforming the way people present, and so that can be hard to kind of filter through. I mean, AI can filter through things that are a lot more objective, like minimum experience or certain technical capabilities that we're hiring for in a particular role, but it can't assess character, and it's not very good at assessing humility and all those other skills. So, it does make it really hard, which is why you need to be lateral in your thinking as to how you approach this process.
No, absolutely. And it reminds me of my own process, when hiring. I think I've learned over the years that you can, and the context here is that I manage a team of journalists. You can teach somebody to be a good journalist, but you can't teach them to be a good person. And that sounds very crude, but what I've discovered is that hiring for culture in the team can really outweigh the technical skills that somebody may be able to bring. Because if you can't have a harmonious, collegiate team that supports each other, then you're not going to get the output and the productivity that you need.
Absolutely. And I think on that, Jerome, is that it's not just a race against technology these days, it's a race against brand, strategy and culture very much falls into that. And I think if you're not prioritizing that as a business, especially as a small one, to my point earlier, that it's one of our big advantages is that having a small aligned team who share the same values will outperform a larger political team. And I think that's where, we can really stay ahead in our industry in a very competitive market.
Yeah. So before we get to the practical steps that you utilize, what lessons have you learned or what steps have you tried before that maybe haven't worked?
I think when I was very early on in my business career, I mean, relatively I still am, but we really only looked for technical capabilities and we didn't really go beyond the resume. And I think that wasn't overly effective. I also think we didn't really qualify the motivation behind the role as well, which I think is a really important thing. Why do people want to work for you? What's their motivation to even work? And I think you need to be aligned on all those things because ultimately I'm very transparent during the interview process. It's a 50-50 relationship. We need to be happy with them, but they equally need to be happy with us. There's no point us bringing someone on board and spending all that time and energy recruiting someone and then them leaving 2 weeks after, you're only fooling yourself in that way. So yeah, that's what I'd say to that. I think it's made me more intentional about the process.
Yeah. So tell us about your 4-step process and also how you came about it.
So I guess how I came about it is listening to so many different amazing leaders across all different businesses. And one thing that was very common amongst them all is they hire for culture, and it is such an incredibly important part of the business because, as I said, a good culture compounds the business success, and a negative culture compounds just in the opposite direction. And so for me, I thought, okay, well, if I'm hiring, last year was my first big hire, head of finance and operations, and I thought, well, we need to get this right. So kind of going beyond the resume, I was like, well, how do I then assess for all these other qualities, especially hiring a head of finance? My background is muscles and bones, not numbers and spreadsheets. So I knew that someone with, 10 plus years experience who had a very wonderful resume, I knew he was capable or she was capable of the job, but how do they show up every day is what we're really assessing for. So by going through a 4-stage process, we're really qualifying not only do they meet the technical capability of the role, but they're aligned culturally too, and they want to be part of the team and they buy into the vision. And I think that is hugely important and breeds momentum. So that's kind of how I came about the 4-step process.
Okay, so what is the 4-step process?
Good question. So phase 1 is a pre-reflective questionnaire. So it essentially doesn't talk about technical capabilities as such. It's more looking into how someone thinks, their attitudes, how their values align with our values as a company. So I ask questions such as, what drives them every day at work, what drains them, describe their ideal work day, what values they resonate with, questions that really get them to tell us more about who they are and how they think. It also qualifies someone, have they just applied for every role that comes into their inbox? Because they may see that and go, oh, I don't want to put in the time to answer these questions, and that's fine. They're not the right person for our business, but I'd rather find that out before then going to the interview stage and wasting everyone's time. So it really gives us insights into how they think from an attitude point of view, and it sets up for a more efficient interview. So that's step 1.
Okay.
Step 2, that's more the traditional formal interview. Again, it's assessing more technical capability as well as communication. One thing that I take from my healthcare background, especially as a physio on the wards, is my ability to listen. And I think that's where talking to friends in recruitment and HR is, it's so easy just to fire off question after question, and you really don't get as much out of the candidate as you otherwise would if you just spent more time listening. I always say you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should do double the listening and half the talking.
Oh, I like that.
And when you have more space for thinking instead of less time for talking, that's quite powerful. Warren Buffett always said that great leaders are not only able to speak really well, but they listen exceptionally. And so taking that into round 1 of the interview process, you let them talk through their resume and you'll naturally pick up gaps, and then you'll go into into more of those gaps. And because of the pre-reflective questionnaire, you've got some of those values that they have and can intertwine that. And so it becomes conversational. You try and make it more relaxed while still maintaining that professionalism.
Okay.
That generally takes about an hour. And then stage 3 is, if they make that round, we'll then probably pick up anything that we didn't cover off in the first interview. They may have gone away and have some more questions for us as well. I throw in a few case studies, get them thinking on their feet, how they adapt to kind of minor stresses, stressful environments. Not that I try and make it stressful, but, critical thinking and thinking on the spot is quite an important quality. So all of those kind of softer skills, and assuming that they do really well in that interview. And that can often be quite hard because we've, interviewed some really amazing candidates, but ultimately it comes down to their motivation for the role, and their attitude and the cultural alignment of that person. And the final round is the more informal round, which I think you get so much out of someone when there's no script and you can't prepare. And so we meet them in our office and they don't necessarily know we're taking them up to a local cafe or one of our favourite places, Raffi, up in North Sydney, is amazing for this. Yeah. And take them there at about 4:00 and we just chew the fat, We predominantly talk about the role and business. There's often someone else from the team that's part of that conversation. So they're meeting them for the first time. They may see things differently, ask a few different questions, also observe how they speak to the waitress or waiter, and just how they deal with a non-structured environment. And because particularly in a small business, things change every day. There's, as much as we're trying to implement structure and processes, they're constantly evolving. So you need to be adaptable and curious and thrive in that kind of environment. So that informal setting really allows us to see those qualities play out more than a traditional interview as such.
Yeah, no, thank you for running us through that. It sounds like a really comprehensive but also, I guess, really worthwhile exercise to go through. And it makes me think, and I'll preface this by noting that I met my wife on a dating app. I don't know if you've ever gone through the online dating experience.
I met my fiance as well on a dating app, so very familiar with that process.
But it made me realize, listening to you speak, that we go through so many more steps with dating somebody when you've met them on an app like Hinge or something like that, before you make the decision to be exclusive with that person than you often do when you're recruiting for a new hire. You may just go through one round of interviews. In my case, I might have them do a writing test after that to check that they're a decent enough journalist. And then you just may make a decision to hire. And it's a financially very significant thing to do. Obviously emotionally draining as well. But listening to you speak, it made me realize that businesses across the board, no matter what sector you're in, probably need to be a lot more deliberate about how they're hiring people, rather than just making snap decisions because you're worried about losing that person to a competitor or to someone else in the market.
Absolutely. And I think it's become more important than ever because, and I mean, I may sound like a broken record, but it's really a strategic advantage for us as a small business. We'll never be able to outspend our competitors, but we can out-strategize them. And one way of doing that is ensuring that we're very intentional and strategic with our hiring process. And as Steve Jobs says, A players hire A players, and that compounds. And you want to work with a team who are aligned, and you want a workplace that's enjoyable to work in, not only for you as a leader, but to have your staff feel empowered, and success will be a byproduct of that.
Yeah. Emma, I've just got a few more questions for you, which we'll get to on the other side of this. Emma, since you started implementing this 4-step process to hiring, what differences have you found with the people that you're bringing into the business versus before you were doing this process?
I feel that there's greater respect for the company and what we're working towards. Not that any other employee hasn't shown respect, but it's more because they've had to go through this process and they've put in the work. They've really earned that role. And so they know that they're valued and that they're respected and their decisions and ideas matter. So I think from that point of view is that people feel more empowered and our team feel empowered to make decisions, and that's builds momentum as well, and it allows me as a CEO to step away from the day-to-day operations and work on the business, because I can trust that the team are going to do an amazing job at refining those processes and making decisions day to day.
And have you found that there are any downsides or risks to undertaking this kind of process? I mentioned the idea of losing people to other roles if, let's say, for example, they feel like the whole process is taking too long, or they just need to get a job. Or have you found that perhaps it then takes a lot longer to hire somebody? Are there any downsides or risks?
Look, I think the only risk of putting so much effort and time into it is if you hire the wrong person, because again, that opportunity costs and all the rest of it. But yeah, it's a good point you mentioned. I think throughout the whole process, I'm respectful of people's times, and a lot of people are wanting to find a job. It's a bit of a scary landscape out there at times. And so we do keep people across kind of the process to some extent. So we'll let them know, we've got over 200 applications. It's going to take a week or so to go through this. So I think if people know that and you keep them informed, then they respect that process. Yeah. I think if they're kind of left in the dark, and unfortunately the feedback we get is that so many employers do just ignore people and ignore candidates. So it's become a bit of the norm, but that's not, who I am. It's not what our company is about. So we want to treat everyone with respect.
Yeah. And so for HR professionals listening to this conversation, Emma, what would you want them to take away from listening to your 4-step process? Certainly they probably need to be more intentional, more deliberate, as you suggested. But what are the key takeaways for them when they go to hiring new staff moving forward?
In a world racing towards automation and utilising technology, culture is what keeps a business human. And so investing the time into that process is hugely important to ensure that you have a team who's aligned, who's strategic. And so being very intentional about who you bring into the room has never been more important in determining the success and enabling a business, especially a small one like ours, to stay ahead and be competitive in the market.
Yeah. And is your 4-step process something that could be applied to any business, or would it require tinkering depending on the size or the sector that the business is in?
Look, I think it depends on the business and what you're hiring for. If you've got a role that requires a lot more technical capability, you may introduce some other psychometric tests or another part of the interview process that we haven't covered. But I guess for a small business, for us, I found that the resume is one thing, but finding out who's behind that resume is incredibly important. And so that 4-step process does allow you to go through that. So yeah, that's why we've done it. And I would encourage any business, I guess, of all sizes to kind of consider it at least, or put it as part of their process going forward.
And just finally, Emma, what excites you about hiring moving forward into the future? Now that you've got this 4-step process that really seems to work for you and your business, what is motivating you about your own recruitment journey?
Learning from others that I bring into the business. I hire for my blind spots, and creating an incredible team who you genuinely enjoy working with is a really powerful thing. And I think that's what will allow us to dominate and continue to build a wonderful company that I'm very proud of. So, a business is not just down to one individual. It's very much a team effort. Yeah. And so recruiting is a huge part of that.
Yeah. Emma Davison, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jerome. Lovely to be here.
And thank you to the listener for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating and review on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, as it'll help other HR professionals discover and enjoy this show. And if you've got ideas for other episodes we can run, please get in touch at editor@hrleader.com.au. You can also reach us on social media. See you again next time.